Morning. Welcome to Thursday e-learning. You're probably so tired of hearing that introduction statement. I need someone to make me a little YouTube jingle that I can put on the beginning of my videos and make it a happier entrance. I don't know. Maybe I'll have to get my sister's family to do that. They're super crafty and creative. Okay, so here's the deal. Good news and bad news. Good news, this is the last day of notes for this week, so I'm sure you're like, ooh, that's awesome. We don't have any new information tomorrow. Bad news is tomorrow is test day. So I know you're like, what the heck? How are we going to take a test? Your assignment today is going to be basically review for your test tomorrow. So it's going to be a similar setup, similar types of questions, similar type of thing that you would see in your test tomorrow. So not a ton of problems, but you're going to have to do some writing, some explaining. Not everyone will have the same questions. So some of those things that you're going to have to take into account, you're going to have to be showing some work and things like that. So for today, we're actually not really adding new information, but more importantly, we're talking about how do we know what option we want to use? So we've learned all these different ways of solving. Okay, so today we're sort of looking at what to use, what way to solve. Okay, if something is a quadratic, if something has an exponent of 2, what way am I going to use? So here's what we know. At this point, we know that we can solve by taking a square root. Okay, and that only works when there's no x to the first power. We know we can solve by looking at a graph. We know we can solve by factoring. We know we can solve by completing the square. And we know we can solve with the quadratic formula. So I will tell you this, worst case situation, if you're like, oh shoot, I'm taking the test, I have no idea how to use the quadratic formula, but I know how to do quadratic formula. Oh, I'm sorry, I just kicked my table. Quadratic formula is the only one that works all the time. You can always use it, you just have to be using it correctly. Okay, but it's gonna be a lot longer. So I am going to tell you, expectation is that you're going to be able to talk about and look at these problems, but if you really needed to fall back on something, quadratic formula would be your way to go. You're not going to get full points, but you'll get the majority of them. So then what are some things that sort of show, okay, this is the method I want to use? Well, taking the square root, we already said, right, it can only have an x squared, no x to the first power. Okay, a graph, we obviously need a graph. For factoring, it's going to have to be factorable. I don't know how else to write that down. We just have to be able to factor it. Completing the square, we know that A has to equal 1. It's really nice if B is even. It's really a pain in the butt if B is odd. I didn't even look at any of those with you because then you have to follow through a decimal. So what I did is I have linked on underneath the assignment this graph. Now, your sort of graph, I'm going to zoom out here so you can see the whole thing. Your graph will be nice and neatly printed and all that stuff, but instead of me having to flip back and forth between a computer screen, because I don't have a printer at home, I just quickly wrote it over by hand. Feel free to do that if you really like to have a paper copy. Feel free to print it if you have a printer. Otherwise, you can just use the online document. It's fine. This is just, so we had one here on the camera. So basically what this says is here's a thought process that you can use. So up here is our starting point, top left-hand corner. Okay. And every time we look at a problem, we can walk through this sort of chart answering these questions, and it's going to tell us what the best method might be or the easiest approach to take to solving it. Now, that doesn't mean that you might not use another approach, especially in a multiple choice question. I wouldn't know any different. Okay, I'm just trying to sort of help you guide through that thought process. Now, if you're someone who says, I don't need to look at this chart, it already makes sense from what I've learned, then don't use this chart. It's okay. Okay, it's just sort of a resource there to help sort of walk you through some steps and some thoughts. So, we're going to look at a problem. I'm going to switch off of this chart here. So, let's say, zoom back in. We want to solve x squared plus 6x plus 8 equals 0. Okay, so we use this table. First question we ask ourselves, is there an x to the first power? So, yep, right here, we see an x to the first power. So, yes, there is an x to the first power, so we're going to follow the yes line. Okay, so then the next question we'll ask ourselves, oh, there should be a question mark on here. Is it a binomial or a trinomial? Well, this has 1, 2, 3 terms, so it's a trinomial. So we're going to follow the trinomial line. Okay, next question, well, does A equal 1? So if we look at the problem, does A equal 1? Yes, A equals 1, so let's follow the yes line. Can you factor it as a trinomial? Well, I don't know. Let's check. 1 times 8 is 8. Okay, do I see a set that adds up to 6? Yep. So yes, I can factor this as a trinomial. So that says, okay, solve this by factoring. So remember, to solve by factoring, we're just going to get this trinomial right here factored. We already found the set, so it factors into an x plus 2 and an x plus 4. And then our rule was to set both of those equal to 0. And if you're like, oh my gosh, I don't remember that at all, go back to the previous video that's about solving by factoring and just rewatch it. It's okay. Right? Sometimes we have to repeat things in class, so you just might have to repeat that video on your own. Okay, and then we'll solve. And so we'll have x equals -2 and x equals -4. Okay, and that's our answer. Okay, so let's look at a second problem. Just going to sort of go through a few here and show you the different options of how it works. How about 2x squared minus 18 equals 0? And some of you might look at that and go, duh, I don't need to use a chart. But just to show you how it works, is there an x to the first power? No, right? This only has an x squared. I don't see an x to the first, so we'll follow the no. And this is solved by taking a square root. So to solve by taking a square root, right, we just do inverse operations. We'll undo multiplication with division. We undo an exponent of 2 with a square root, so we'll square root each side. This is the most commonly missed points on the test. Make sure you know when you add that square root, we get plus or minus 3, which means this has 2 answers, a 3 and a -3. Okay, 2 answers there. How about x squared minus 6x equals 4. Okay, so is there an x to the first power? Yes. So we're going to follow the yes line. Is it a binomial or a trinomial? Now we have to be really careful here because my students will want to answer this as if there's a binomial, but this does not equal 0, so this 4 counts as a term, which means this is a trinomial. Okay, does A equal 1? Well, yep, A equals 1, so I'm going to follow my yes line. Can we factor it as a trinomial? Well, I don't know. I could check. So if I had x squared minus 6x minus 4 equals 0. Yeah, none of those are going to add up to -6. So no. And it's possible that you just look at this and say, yeah, no, I don't think so. You might not even write this down. It's okay if you say no and it actually was a yes. It's not going to be wrong. You're just going to use a different option as someone else. Okay, so no, can't factor it as a trinomial. Is B even? Well, B in this problem is -6. So yep, B is even. So I'm going to solve by completing the square. Okay, so for completing the square, I need it to be equal to the constant. This is equal to the constant, so that's good news. Okay, so I'm going to find B, which is -6. Take half of it, which is -3. Square that, which is 9. Okay, then I'm going to take that 9 and I'm going to add it onto each side. So 9 plus 4 gives me 13. I'm going to factor over here, and remember, it just factors into a binomial with that middle term. I keep hitting the desk, sorry. Okay, then I'm going to square root each side. So that exponent of 2 and square root cancel each other out. I added the square root, so I need a plus or minus. And we'll undo subtracting 3 by adding 3. So I'll get x equals plus or minus the square root of 13 plus 3. Now, let's say you're looking at multiple choice, you're like, oh my gosh, I don't see that answer anywhere. Keep in mind that this could also be in the different order, and we could have a positive 3 plus or minus the square root of 13, right? We can change that order. So either of those options would be fine. This is the format we tend to get with quadratic formula, and this is the format we tend to get with completing the square. Now, if you looked at this one up here and you're like, oh shoot, I really just don't know how to do this with completing the square, please then just decide to say, okay, I'm going to set this equal to 0. And I'm going to go the route of the quadratic formula. So a equals 1, b is negative 6, c is negative 4. I'm going to go just a little bit quick here because you don't necessarily need to write this all down. I just want to show you. All over 2 times 1. So let's see, we'll have 36, 52 under here. We'll need to simplify this. 26. So here's what your work would look like if you went the route of quadratic formula. And then we'd just get 3 plus or minus 1 square root of 13, right? Same answer, so you'd be fine. Okay. How about if we are given something that says x squared so I'm going to read the table, but I'm not going to flip back and forth. Okay, so is there an x to the first power? Yep, so we're going to follow the S line. Is it a binomial or a trinomial? So trinomial, so now this is 0, so this does not count as a term. So this is a binomial. So it tells us to solve by factoring, right? And to factor out a GCF. So this has a GCF of x. And then we'll set both of those factors equal to 0. We'll solve over here. So we'll get x equals 0 and x equals negative 5. Again, if you wanted to solve this original problem with a quadratic formula, it does work all the time. Make sure you're recognizing here that your a would equal 1, your b would equal 5, and your c would equal 0. It's a terrible 0, but okay. Trying to check off the list and make sure I touch base on everything I want to touch base on with. One more thing. Let's say we have 3x squared plus 2x equals 14. Okay, so first question, is there an x to the first power? Yep, so we'll follow the S line. Is it a binomial or trinomial? This is 14, not 0, so it counts. So 1, 2, 3 terms, so trinomial. Does a equal 1? No, it does not. So we're going to want to use the quadratic formula. Okay, so to use the quadratic formula, we need this to equal 0. And once we get it set equal to 0, then we'll say a is 3, B is 2. C is negative 14. So negative B. Let's see, B squared minus 4 times A times C, one big long fraction bar, all over 2A. Okay, so let's check underneath the square root here. So let's see. $172. I think this is actually similar to one that we did in our notes yesterday. It's okay. We need to simplify that 172. Actually might be the same problem we did in our notes yesterday, which means we should be super good at it. So negative 2 plus or minus 2 square root 43 all over 6, and then making sure that we're simplifying. So this will be a negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 43. You can write that 1 in front, but you don't need it. All over 3. Okay, so really make sure you take time on the assignment today because it will be preparing you for the assessment tomorrow. Have a good day, guys.